Pablo Escobar, Colombian, Medellin Drug Cartel. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria December 1949 to December 1993 was a Colombian drug lord and narco-terrorist who founded and led the Medellin cartel. Escobar, who was born in Rio Negro and raised in Medellin, briefly attended the Universidad Autónoma Latinoamericana in Medellin before dropping out and turning to criminal enterprises such as selling illegal cigarettes and phony lottery tickets, as well as stealing cars. Escobar founded the Medellin cartel in 1976, which supplied powder cocaine and pioneered the first smuggling routes into the United States. In the 1982 parliamentary election, Escobar was elected as an alternate member of the Colombian Chamber of Representatives as part of the Liberal Alternative Party. In 1991, Escobar surrendered to authorities and was sentenced to 5 years in prison for a number of offenses, but he struck a deal with Colombian President Cesar Gaviria to escape extradition in exchange for the option of being imprisoned in his own self-built prison, La Catedral. While many denounce Escobar's crimes, many Colombians regard him as a Robin Hood-like figure who provided various benefits to the poor. On December 1, 1949, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born in Rio Negro, Colombia's Antioquia department. Escobar, who grew up in Medellin, is supposed to have begun his criminal career as a child by stealing gravestones and sanding them down to sell to local smugglers. In his book The Accountant's Story, Roberto Escobar describes how Pablo rose from middle-class obscurity to become one of the world's wealthiest men. In 1975, Pablo began expanding his cocaine enterprise, dispatching planes many times along smuggling routes into the United States, mostly between Colombia and Panama. As the demand for cocaine in the United States increased substantially, Escobar planned more smuggling shipments, routes, and distribution networks in South Florida, California, Puerto Rico, and other regions of the country. Escobar and Robert Vesco purchased the vast majority of the island's land, including a 1-kilometer, 3,300-foot, runway, a harbor, a hotel, houses, boats, and planes, and built a refrigerated storage facility to keep the cocaine. In 1982, Escobar was elected as an alternate member of Colombia's Chamber of Representatives as part of the Liberal Alternative Movement. The Medellin cartel was in charge of a large portion of the drugs entering the United States, including Puerto Rico, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, and Spain, and Escobar became well known internationally as his drug network increased in power. As the demand for more and better cocaine developed, Escobar began working with Roberto Suarez Gomez, assisting in the spread of the drug throughout the Americas, Europe, and even Asia, according to rumors. Escobar is suspected of assisting left-wing terrorists from the 19th of April movement, often known as M19, in the 1985 assault on the Colombian Supreme Court. While importing 15 tons of cocaine each day, worth more than $500 million, into the United States, the cartel spent over $1,000 per week on rubber bands to wrap the stacks of cash they received, keeping the majority of it in their warehouses. While seen as an enemy of the United States and Colombian governments, Escobar was a hero to many in Medellin, especially to the poor. Some Medellin inhabitants routinely aided Escobar in eluding police capture by acting as lookouts, withholding information from authorities, and doing everything else they could to keep him safe. Cesar Gaviria's administration initiated action against Escobar and the drug cartels after the assassination of Luis Carlos Galán. In exchange for a reduced sentence and special treatment while incarcerated, the government eventually persuaded Escobar to surrender and cease all illegal activity. As word of Escobar's persistent criminal activity in jail spread, the government attempted to transfer him to a more regular prison on July 22, 1992. Following Escobar's escape, members of the U.S. Joint Special Operations Command, DEVGRUG, SEAL Team 6, and Delta Force, as well as Centra Spike began a manhunt for him. They assisted in the training and advice of the Search Block, a Colombian police task force tasked with locating Escobar. In May 1976, Escobar and several of his men were arrested and found in possession of 18 kilograms, 39 pounds, of white paste, attempting to return to Medellin with a heavy load from Ecuador. Initially, Pablo tried to bribe the Medellin judges who were forming a case against him and was unsuccessful. As Escobar's battle with the US and Colombian governments continued on, a vigilante group known as Los Pipis, Los Perseguidos por Pablo Escobar, People Persecuted by Pablo Escobar, was formed. The Cali cartel and right-wing paramilitaries led by Carlos Castillo, who would later fund the Córdoba and Yoruba peasant self-defense forces, were among his opponents and former colleagues who funded the group. Los Peep's furious campaign resulted in the deaths of over 300 Escobar associates, his lawyer, and relatives, as well as the destruction of a significant percentage of the Medellin cartel's assets. Members of the search bloc, as well as Colombian and U.S. intelligence agencies, collaborated with Los Pipis in their hunt for Escobar, or moonlighted as both the search bloc and Los Pipis at the same time. Escobar built or purchased a variety of residences and safe houses after becoming wealthy, the most well-known of which being the Hacienda Napoles. De Berdwar would employ a documentary film team and skilled treasure hunters to look for anything associated to Escobar or his cartel before and after the structure was disassembled. The rival Cali cartel controlled the cocaine market until the mid-1990s, when its leaders were either slain or imprisoned by Colombian authorities, shortly after Escobar's death and the subsequent disintegration of the Medellin cartel. In Medellin, Escobar's Robin Hood persona had a long-lasting impact. Escobar's death was widely lamented, particularly by the city's poor, whom he had aided while alive, and his funeral drew nearly 25,000 people. Virginia Vallejo, a television anchorwoman who had a sexual relationship with Escobar from 1983 to 1987, testified in the prosecution of former Senator Alberto Santofimio, who was charged with complicity in the 1989 death of presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galán, on July 4, 2006. The journalist claimed Escobar paid for the M19 operation, but she blamed the army for the killings of over 100 individuals, including 11 Supreme Court justices, M19 members, and cafeteria workers. Henao was imprisoned for 18 months after the local media identified her as Escobar's widow. Her funds were scrutinized. Following Escobar's death, the government used the Extinción de Dominio law to give the ranch, zoo, and castle of Hacienda Napoles to low-income families, domain extinction. At Hacienda Napoles, Escobar kept 4 hippos in a private menagerie. They were left on Escobar's untended estate after Escobar's death because they were thought too difficult to capture and relocate. Medellin police demolished the 6-story Edificio Monaco apartment building in the El Poblado neighborhood of Medellin at 11:53 a.m. on February 22, 2019, according to former Colombian General Rosso José Serrano, where Escobar planned some of his most terrible crimes. Mayor Federico Gutiérrez had campaigned for the edifice to be demolished and replaced with a park to remember the thousands of cartel victims, including 4 presidential candidates and 500 police officers. Several books have been written about Escobar,